And so if you have your Bibles with you, I'd encourage you to turn to John chapter 2. We'll be in John chapter 2, verses 1 through 12 this morning. Now, if you might remember the 2016 movie Finding Dory, which is the sequel to Finding Nemo, there is a scene where some of the main characters need help from a loon named Becky. Now, when I say a loon, I actually mean the bird that's like up there. But Becky is portrayed as somewhat flighty and possibly unreliable, like we might call someone a loon. But anyway, in the movie, Marlin and Nemo need her help, and in order to get her attention from afar, they're supposed to shout, "Hooroo!" Now, since my family saw this movie 9 years ago, it was actually Hannah's first movie in movie theaters, if I remember correctly. We get each other's attention by just saying, "Hooroo!" Might be at home, might be at the store, might be at church. And if you hear us do it, you might think we are just insane, okay? But we know what we're doing. I want you to think about that as we go to our Bible reading for today from John chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "What business do you have with me, woman? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he tells you, do it." Now there were 6 stone water pots standing there for the Jewish custom of purification, containing 2 or 3 measures each. Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water." So they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Draw some out now, and take it to the head waiter." And they took it to him. Now, when the head waiter tasted the water which had become wine and did not know where it had come from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the groom and said to him, "Every man serves the good wine first, and when the guests are drunk, then he serves the poorer wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum, he and his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there a few days. A lot of times when we are reading a story or when we are acting in a way with our families, the context of what we're doing and the context of what is going on matters. Otherwise, you may not have any idea what is going on. Reading the story of Jesus at this wedding can feel like hearing someone say something with which you have no context. Now, for those of you who have grown up in the church and have grown accustomed to this story, maybe you've just moved past the confusion and accepted the story. But if we stop just 10 seconds to think about this miracle, it can almost mess with our perception of who Jesus is. And in fact, it can almost go against the ethics and morals that we may have assumed about our faith. This is Jesus' first miracle. His miracle of keeping a party going by serving a whole bunch more wine to drunk people. That's what Jesus wanted to do for his first miracle? What is happening here? And then the miracle is only known by a select few people. It's not like he's, having this grand entrance and saying, here I am. Only a few people know what's going on. What are we missing? So let's start to look at the facts of this story. Jesus, his family, his mother, and his disciples are invited to a wedding in Cana in Galilee. Cana was probably about 10 miles away from Bethlehem, or from Nazareth, where Jesus grew up. It wouldn't be out of the question that Jesus and his disciples, his family, would have been invited to this wedding because they knew the bride and groom, the bride and or groom, and they went to the wedding and planned on staying there for probably a week, because that's how long wedding celebrations were in Israel during this time. It was on the groom to be able to provide for the party that would last for a week. So when Jesus' mother comes to Jesus and says they have no wine, the family of the groom is in trouble. Now, typically in our culture, if you go to a wedding and the alcohol runs out, it's just time for everybody to go home. But in this time, the party had to last a certain amount of time. The people who were responsible could have brought great shame on their family for not being able to provide enough wine and food for the party to last a week. Now, why Jesus' mother goes to Jesus with this information, we do not have insight about. Some have speculated that this is a family member of Jesus who is getting married. That is why Jesus' mother is so concerned about the wine. But we really can't know for certain why Mary goes to Jesus, but she does. Maybe she believes that Jesus can do something for this family. So they are at this wedding. Mary says they have no wine, and Jesus, almost rather abruptly in English, says, "What business do you have with me, woman? My hour has not yet come." So Mary goes to Jesus, and Jesus is saying, "Well, what do you want me to do about it? It's not time yet." But Mary then turns to the servants and says, "Okay, whatever he tells you to do, go ahead and do it." Mary assumes that Jesus will take care of the situation. Now, did Mary know that Jesus could turn water into wine? I don't think so. This is the first miracle that he has performed. This is not something that he has done throughout his life. But Jesus was Mary's firstborn son. And what we do know from the Gospels is in Jesus' adulthood, Joseph is not on the scene at all. What we can almost assume is that at some point between when Jesus is 12 and when Jesus is 30, Joseph dies at some point. Now, as a mother going to her firstborn son, she looked to Jesus to help her, like any widow would to go to their firstborn. Just like the eldest in a family have some more responsibilities than the other kids usually have. So Mary goes to Jesus and says, they have no wine. Maybe it's a family member, and Jesus is now going to be basically in charge of figuring out what to do. But all of that still doesn't get at the point that we have been thinking about. Jesus even says, "It's not my hour yet." Remember, later in the story, only a few people know what he does. In the Gospel of John, his hour is when he will die for the sins of the world, when the people will see the Messiah make a sacrifice. A few chapters later in John chapter 7, verse 30, Jesus has made some people upset in Jerusalem, and it says in verse 30, they were seeking to arrest him, and yet no one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come. A few chapters later in John chapter 13, when he is in the upper room with his disciples, it says in John chapter 13, verse 1, now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come, that he would depart from this world to the Father. In John, when he says something about his hour, it's about the end of his life. The hour has come for him to make a sacrifice for the rest of the world. So he tells Mary, it's not my hour yet. I can't reveal who I am to the masses just yet. So the miracle is only known by the servants and his disciples. This miracle turns water into wine. It helps overserve more people at a wedding. So we're still missing something, I think. So let's go deeper. Let's not just look at the facts of this story, but let's start to figure out, what is Jesus trying to say to the disciples who do see the miracle performed? And let's us start to discern why John shares this story when none of the other gospel writers do. What are we supposed to see in this story? Well, as Jesus is beginning his ministry, he is showing the disciples that this is what they can expect. This is the type of miracles that Jesus can do. He is fulfilling quickly what he told them at the end of John chapter 1 in verse 50. He said, you will see greater things than these. Nathanael becomes one of Jesus' disciples because essentially Jesus says, yeah, I know what you were talking about when you were under that fig tree with your brother. And he's like, how can you know that? Jesus says, you'll see even greater things. And this is one of the things that he sees. But that still doesn't answer the question, why a wedding, why wine? Just happened to be there and it's a need. What can we figure out? Well, I do think it's significant that it's a wedding. I do think it's significant that it is water into wine. But I think we can see from this story what Jesus is doing. The sign that Jesus is showing is that the old wine has been exhausted and the new wine is here. The old is gone and the new is here. That is what Jesus is doing by performing this miracle for his disciples. He is showing them. John is telling us that at the party, the old wine was gone, the inferior wine was gone, and Jesus is able to bring even greater things. Jesus is able to bring new things into each and every one of our lives for those who want to follow him. The old is gone, and the new is here. In the ancient world, wine was symbolic for produce and provision and life. Jesus is using this to show us and show his disciples that he can make new life, and it is greater than anything in the past. Now, there is the thing to note that in the middle of the story, it tells us that there's these 6 stone pots that can contain 2 or 3 measures each. Your Bible might say our units of measurement of 20 to 30 gallons each. So if we just take the average, Jesus has made 150 gallons of wine, which is just an absurd and extravagant amount. And I think that's the point. Jesus can do far more than we ask or imagine. What can you imagine Jesus doing at First Baptist Gonzales? I thought about this week, and I thought about our friends just a little bit north and east of us in Flatonia. Tim Rowell's the pastor there. He's been there for over 20 years. And Flatonia Baptist Church runs between 200 and 300 on a Sunday morning. In a town of 1,300. Wasn't always the case. But God has done immeasurable things in that church, to where 15% of the town's population is at church there on Sunday morning. Do you know what that would look like here at First Baptist Gonzales? I do, because I did the math. It'd be 1,000 people here on a Sunday morning. We'd have to have 4 or 5 services. I'd be exhausted and take a nap every Sunday afternoon. So let's bring it. Let's go. That'd be awesome, right? Can you imagine what God could do when we let Him? Jesus is better than anything. He can do incredible, what we would consider absurd things in our community if we rely on Him. But it's not just about the quantity that Jesus can do. Jesus is about the quality as well. When this new wine is taken to the steward, he tastes it and he goes straight to the groom and says, "This is better than anything you have served this whole time." Most people serve the good stuff first. Jesus is showing his disciples that he is superior to anything that was. A relationship with Jesus is better than religious observances. And when I say a relationship with Jesus, I mean spending time with Him. I mean following Him, being His disciple, yearning to be like Him. Talking about the characteristics of the heart and letting Jesus change who you are on the inside. That is more important than just going to church and participating in Christianity. Rafael Trujillo was the leader of the Dominican Republic from 1930 to 1961. And during those 3 decades, he actually opened the country to American Christian missionaries. And much of what Stitch does there now can be traced to that time period when Trujillo opened up the country for missionaries. But Trujillo was also a ruthless dictator who killed almost 50,000 of his own people across 3 decades of his rule. Now, as the story goes, Trujillo built a church next to his palace and his home so that whenever he tortured and killed people, he could make a quick walk to church and ask for forgiveness. This is what one does when Christianity is your religion and you're not a disciple of Jesus. When you're just going through the ritual and you're not following Him. Following Jesus is not about ritual and habitual works. Following Jesus is a relationship and letting Him change you on the inside. What stone jars do you need to repurpose in your life and in our church? Those 6 stone jars that Jesus uses, it tells us they were used for Jewish rituals. By using them, Jesus is saying, you don't need to use these in this way anymore. What does Jesus want to repurpose for something far better in your life and in our church? I think about how many of us come to church on Sunday morning every week, or at least most weeks, and it doesn't change a thing about how we live our life. Maybe we even come on Sunday nights. Maybe we come on Wednesday nights and we serve, or we go to a Bible study, and then we do a weekly Bible study as well, and we read a devotion every morning, and we have prayer time throughout the week. But nothing changes about how we love people, or how we have joy in life, or how we are patient, or have self-control. Something's disconnected when this happens. If that's you, then you have some stone jars that are filled with water, and you are just going through the motions of religion. Jesus is calling you to stop being part of rituals and instead fill yourself with His glory and let His glory change you. It is in this sign that Jesus gives that Jesus shows His disciples who He is. And it is through this sign that Jesus shows us as well His glory. When you have chosen to follow Jesus, Jesus' glory lives inside of you. His glory should change you and should change your outlook on life. His glory should change the way that you interact with the world. So what are you going to do this week, outside of these walls, to follow Jesus? What are you going to do to show the world that you are filled with His glory?